Star Trek Strange New Worlds looks like it's aiming to bring classic style Star Trek to modern viewers, but when drawing from the past, does it possibly keep what it should maybe lose? Stick around and I'll share my thoughts. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, the Season 1 premiere. The synopsis for the series on IMDb reads, a prequel to Star Trek the original series, the show will follow the crew of the USS Enterprise under Captain Christopher Pike. And this iteration of Pike and some of his crewmates was already kind of introduced in Star Trek Discovery a few years back, and so people that are fans of those shows of that show will maybe recognize the actor playing Christopher Pike and know a little bit of the backstory. You don't need to know that backstory to come into it, as they kind of catch you up on the most important details of Pike and his story. The synopsis on IMDb for Episode 1 reads, Captain Christopher Pike comes out of self-imposed exile to rescue an officer gone missing during a secret mission. So, what does this feel like? How is it maybe different from... Well, I guess I'm not going to compare and contrast to Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. Pike starts out at home on Earth. He's avoiding Starfleet as he's internally, mentally, and emotionally dealing with the vision of his... Well, I'll say quote-unquote death. I mean, classic fans of the very original series of Star Trek know that Pike ends up being like so disfigured and damaged that he at some point spends the rest of his days as a completely paralyzed person inside this, what the equivalent of a science fiction iron lung that's able to kind of move around, but he can't speak. His communication is limited to just blinking lights and stuff. So it's just, you know, the kind of existence that we would all be horrified to find ourselves in. But that, classic fans will know, is Pike's fate, and that was refreshed and affirmed in Star Trek Discovery when he had this vision of the future in one of the episodes that he was featured in. And so this show starts reminding us of that reality. And so right now he's trying to seemingly avoid his fate by being off duty and wanting to stay off duty, but he is forced to resume command of the Enterprise. And this fear, this dread that underlies his character is really what drew me in at the beginning of the episode. Although before long it fades into the background of what feels like a fairly standard Star Trek episode, where the away team, including the captain, are going undercover to a pre-warp planet, who's not encountered the Federation and stuff, and so they're having to interact with a society that hasn't discovered Gene Roddenberry's, the creator of Star Trek, prophesied utopian unification of all people. There are definitely more character moments and setups for potentially interesting character arcs, character developments than classic Trek, like 90s and the 60s show. But the away mission felt very archaic to me, just archaic with a fresh coat of paint. And the moralizing with a smile at the end of this episode felt overly simplistic and easy, and very much like classic Star Trek. I like that Star Trek is about unifying people in conflict. That's a major value that I see throughout the various iterations of Star Trek. But the kind of writing in this episode that's kind of serving that value, I think, oversimplifies conflict. We don't even really see what these two factions on this planet that they visit are ultimately fighting over. We just know that they're fighting, and we can all agree, yes, war is wrong unless there's some kind of justification for it, which I think most people would say is very rare, and some people would say there's never a justification for it. Maybe that's the view behind the writing here, and so they don't bother to even explore it, because how could it be justified? I don't know. Maybe it's the constraints of wanting the episode to be a certain length, but I would prefer an exploration of the moral complexities and nuanced worldviews that are almost always part of political conflicts. We already oversimplify political conflicts, and especially when we're thinking about the people that disagree with us, we oversimplify their view. We don't really give time and patience to understand that there are some complexities there, and maybe some points of agreement that we can see eye to eye on, even though we see the solution to those problems as being very different things. I mean, there's so much nuance And even though it's great that Star Trek is like, we want to come to peace, we want to figure out how to talk to each other and not, be in conflict and certainly not in violent conflict. But if we want to do something useful along those lines, I think we need to start talking about how we talk, how we find compromise, and there's just none of that here. Now, they could attempt to do that in the future. Maybe this is just kind of like a basic setup saying, here, this is classic Trek, and yes, we're going to be dealing with these kinds of issues. This isn't a good example of dealing with those issues and the nuances of them, but we've got a whole series. We can explore a piece at a time, the different types of nuance that can show up, and I hope that they do that. There's just no signs that that's what they're going to do based on this first episode. Instead, the simple message that fixes it all at the end of this episode is basically, listen, guys, you can blow yourself up or you can explore the stars with us, and that's just way too oversimplistic, especially for people who aren't really interested in space exploration. That's not going to have a lot of weight. The episode started out, as I said, with great potential to hook me because of Pike's character and what he's going through, but they virtually seem to solve Pike's internal problem or remove the weight of it by the end. In fact, I would think, based on what we see in this episode, that in Pike's mind, you know what? He's resolved this issue. It's not going to be a problem for him. But then they show a preview of coming this season on Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and there is a reference to this internal impending death that Pike is still maybe processing in some way. But the way they present it in this episode is, you know what? I figured this out, and I'm at peace with this, and I'm saying it with a smile, and so they're falling back on a plot structure that's just idealistic and overly simplistic. I think it's probably going to have a satisfying sense of nostalgia and optimism for many viewers, and especially viewers that really like classic Trek and want to return to that. But it doesn't connect with me, dramatically speaking. And I'll talk about thematically that stuff a little bit later. In addition, the show starts out feeling very earthy and grounded to me. No puns intended. It starts out on Earth with Pike in a very relatable kind of a home environment, and in one scene, they take pains to explain how there's this medical camouflaging tech that they're using to blend in with the people on the planet. But despite kind of giving it a grounded feel in those kinds of instances, they still either expect us to remember or know how they communicate with alien life, or expect us to pretend that everyone on planets that they visit who have never heard of the Federation or other alien life somehow are speaking English. Farscape introduced translator microbes in the very first episode, and a similar device being mentioned here would have helped me buy in a little bit more. Now, granted, Farscape was the start of a new franchise, a new whole fictional universe, whereas that's far from the case with Star Trek Strange New Worlds. But that just says that's just one more thing to me in this episode that says this is not really for people that are new to Star Trek. We're not trying to get people that have never watched Star Trek before. We're trying to get people that that already know about Star Trek, that accept some of these conventions, like everyone speaking English seemingly. I'm also a little tired of so many aliens just being humans with a bit of Play-Doh covering parts of them. I mean, especially when we're dealing with a species here. I can't remember if this species is shows up in later in the timeline, because this is a prequel to the original series, and they basically had bigger foreheads with big huge freckles, and I've seen something like that before. I don't know if it's exact configuration of where the lumps were and where the freckles were, but I mean, lumps and freckles I've seen so many times in so many different episodes of Star Trek, and I'm just over it. I mean, makeup and prosthetics have come so far, and Farscape spoiled me a long, long time ago now, to the point where there's just nothing interesting to me about, lumps and freckles. I don't think this show is being made for me, though. Despite watching nearly all of Star Trek The Next Generation, all of Deep Space Nine, all of Voyager, I'm not really a big Trek fan. That's just kind of like the sci-fi that was available and on at the time when it was coming out. And I liked it. I was invested in it. I was invested in those characters, again, because that's what there was. But if there would have been, so many other shows that I've come to watch since then, like, I'm just like, for me, the bar has been raised in terms of not objective quality. I understand that, I'm talking subjectively. If you love this, what Star Trek is doing and you're enjoying it, hey, great. But for me, I just want something different that a lot of shows have been doing more and more of, namely character-driven stuff, heavy dramatic weight to situations, But I think this is a show for fans of classic Star Trek who want to get back to the basics of exploring. And the title of this show, Strange New Worlds, the structure of this episode, and what is being said in its final moments all clearly seem to communicate that this show is aiming to be classic Star Trek with a fresh coat of modern filmmaking. As far as the cast goes, I really like Anson Mount as Captain Pike. I've liked him since I first saw him on Discovery. I think he's really best in the dramatic moments and also in his casual, joking moments, He felt more artificial to me in the smiling moralization moments. So it makes me wonder if the actor himself felt like these moments were a little bit unnatural as well, because they didn't seem to fit. I don't know. Maybe that was just me reacting on a meta level to the content of what was being said. But there was something, I think, about the performance that I was like, this seems, I don't know, unnatural somehow. Rebecca Romijn was known more as kind of a beauty in the 90s and the 2000s in terms of the roles that she was cast in. And so I've not seen substantial acting chops from her in the past. She just wasn't being cast in those kinds of roles, and this role as the first officer to Pike has been the first role where there's potentially really some meaty acting for her to do, but not much that I recall in her appearances in Discovery has been required of her on an acting level, and the same was true here. She wasn't doing. There was nothing that she was doing that was like bad or fake or whatever, but it's just the dramatic content or the acting content that would be required of someone, reading these lines, doing these lines and playing this character in this situation. There wasn't a lot that would have been, that's, required of her. So I'm wondering what she will bring or not as an actor in this show, and kind of how the writing for that character will be and what opportunities it will present. Ethan Peck is fine as Spock. I'm hoping that Spock's half-human nature will give this actor the freedom to explore some variances of emotion that Leonard Nimoy never really did. Maybe purists would feel like, well, we don't want him to do something that's too different from Leonard Nimoy, and I get that, and it's, he probably won't, because again, I think this is for the fans, but I would really like them to just feel free to kind of retroactively do a soft reboot and just give us some different versions, different presentations of these characters. They already arguably are in some aesthetic things. So I would love for them to take more license in stretching the old formula and the old characters into some in new and interesting ways. No real signs of that yet, so I mean, we'll see if I continue watching it. The pieces, I think, are all here for a solid cast that performs well. It's really going to depend on the writing to hook me or not. As far as stunts and visuals go, I feel like the visuals are solid. The visual effects are solid. They're on par with Discovery. Same with sets and costumes. All, real quality stuff. Not a ton of action, but plenty of effects that are associated with, say, destruction and peril that I thought were executed well, both practical and CGI. So I think that that's probably going to be satisfying in future episodes as well. I found myself liking the color schemes of the bridge, even though they're very striking, and there's more color in general because they're mining that 1960s visual design, which had a lot more solid colors and stuff going on. And so I could see that going on, but still in the context of what was aiming for a more groundedness, grittiness, more textures and details and stuff all over the place. And so it seemed like a nice halfway point between the fidelity of the 1960s aesthetic and a modern, more textured and grounded look to everything. Okay, so themes. Let's talk about it. Is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation here? It's definitely, I think, positioned to be another political messenger, like nearly all Star Trek of the past, and as usual, all signs point to it specifically being a messenger for liberal politics. So if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, that kind of agenda, you might get taken out of the experience a number of times from both its subtle and less subtle political elements. Pike's wrestling with his impending death is such a great theme, a universal, non-political theme that I would have loved for them to embrace more and show signs that they were going to continue to embrace. It might still be a thread through the series, and I hope that it will be, because an awareness of our mortality, processing our mortality, can give us a heart of wisdom, as one psalm says. But I get the impression that they aren't going to lean on that theme as much as I'd want, nor do I think that naturalism and humanism, the philosophical pillars of Star Trek, have the tools to really process mortality in a healthy, logically consistent way. So it seems like it's going to just get a Band-Aid, an overly simplistic Band-Aid put on that internal struggle of Pike's as well. And as I said earlier, in addition to being dramatically unsatisfying, the resolution of the political conflict through a brief moralizing monologue delivered with a patiently condescending smile was just way too simplistic for me. Felt like it was recycled from so many overly simplistic sentiments expressed in Star Trek episodes of the past, so I do not have any real hopes that this show will say much of note. Its philosophizing style may contribute to its nostalgic vibe, but it doesn't look like it's going to be bringing new or more sophisticated and nuanced ideas to its handling of life's biggest issues, unfortunately. Now, I have no idea what your tastes are in TV shows, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter. Definitely skip this one at least until the season is complete. Then maybe it's a second screen experience while you play video games. Give it a chance that way to make you slowly, a bit at a time, pause your game for longer and longer stretches as it hooks you in momentarily, and then you lose interest again, and just kind of see if maybe eventually it would hook you in enough to put down your controller for an entire episode. But that's the most you're going to want to give to this. You're not going to want to sit down and give your undivided attention to another episode of this until it can, really get its hooks in you. It's solid. It's even good for your tastes, but there are too many other options for your evenings that you're going to enjoy more. It's rated TV, 13 or 14 or something, not like MA, but the rating, the only qualification they gave was for violence. And that did seem to be the case in my viewing of it as well. And those are all my thoughts for now on Star Trek Strange New Worlds, the Season 1 premiere. Oh, man, I was fighting a burp there and I lost the battle. Anyway, I would love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get info about the benefits of being an insider over at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Then I hope you will check out the Christian Geek Central podcast and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.
Do you like games? I like games. Do you like games too? I like games too. I like games too.